Welcome to Globe Watch with me, Charles Ebune. Roughly 10 months from now, world leaders will be meeting in the Moroccan city of Marrakech for the 22nd time to discuss about climate change. It will be a logical follow-up of last year's Paris Climate Change Conference, which took place in France. Why should we meet again to talk climate change when we all agreed we sealed a deal in Paris, France? My guest today is one of the environmental campaigners in Africa and was one of the chief negotiators in Paris, France. He comes from the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance. Augustine Njamnshi, welcome to Globe Watch.
Thank you, Charles.
Why should we meet again to talk about climate change?
Well, the issue is we've had 3 conventions in Rio. That's the 3 Rio conventions in 1992 were the Convention on Biological Diversity, the Convention on Desertification, and the Convention on Climate Change, or UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Those conventions usually have what they call Conference of the Parties, and it's a yearly thing. So if we had COP21 and it was very well mediatized, it doesn't mean that there have not been many other conferences. We've always had Conference of the Parties every year. And then if a convention has a protocol attached to it, the convention, the Conference of the Parties, serves as the meeting of the parties to the protocol of that convention. So we've been having the Conference of the Parties of the Climate Change Convention, and we'll continue to have them.
From an environmental campaigner perspective, do you think that after Paris in France last year, we are still in the original protocol of what we agreed in Kyoto?
Far from it in the sense that it's not only the Kyoto Protocol that we derail from it, we almost derail from the convention itself. The Kyoto Protocol, for instance, has a very basic principle, which is having the countries or the parties divided into 2. Annex 1 countries, that's industrialized countries, and then the non-Annex 1 parties, which are in most of the time are developing countries who are still struggling with their own economies. The spirit of the Kyoto or of the Paris agreement, although there's still this differentiation, but in practice, every other country is called upon to make efforts. And the principle of the convention of common but differentiated responsibilities with respective capacities is somehow diluted because they have added now national circumstances, which means that developing countries will not just stay as developing countries as it was the case in the Kyoto Protocol, but they will be asked to make more efforts according to the present national circumstances, which means that if a country in 1992 was a developing country and has emerged as a big economy, they are being asked now to make more efforts. So we are not still in the spirit of the Kyoto Protocol. And then again, the second point is the spirit of the Kyoto Protocol was a top-down process or a top-down mechanism where the countries of the world came together and said, this is what we need to do to solve the climate crisis. We have to reduce the carbon dioxide emissions by this percentage. And each country that had the responsibility to do so was given a target to meet. This time around, it's a bottom-up approach where a country pledges what they can do. And even the reporting about it, or even the getting to that target is not obligatory, as you see. It's a kind of do what you are able to do.
Okay, you just point one element which was of huge debate in Paris last year, because the original idea was that carbon emissions, that part of it should be obligatory to everybody, but that wasn't the case. They came out with intended national reduction frameworks or development contributions and whatsoever. You were in Paris, France. Was Paris a foundation of the climate justice movement or a ceiling of it?
Paris, taken positively, is kind of a flaw for discussion. The thing is, Paris was, it had to, the stakes for Paris were very high, both from developing countries and developed countries. And the French presidency had to play a very key role in listening to both parties, because we had very polarized positions as we got to Paris. Even in Paris, these positions were still very polarized. So they had to, listen to everybody, non-stakeholders like us, and then the states, the business, and all those other stakeholders to come up with something that is agreeable to nearly everybody. It had to avoid the Copenhagen fiasco. And let me tell you, we had no choice. We had no choice than to come out with an agreement in Paris. latest NASA statistics show that we've reached already 402.65 parts per million of carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere, something that we never wanted to do. So 2015 was one of the hottest, if not the hottest years in human history, and then we reached that tipping point of 402 parts per million of carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere. So the stakes were very high.
The stakes were very high, and that is why there were so many demonstrations and rallies in Paris, France last year during the summit, and you were heading one of them. And this is what you said in Paris. For 21 years, there have been talks but no action, while we in Africa continually face the danger of climate change. Africa is the continent most affected by climate change. Those are your declarations. Why should a continent that contributes less than 5% of the climate change disaster be so much vulnerable?
Well, those are they're both natural and also political, economic, in the sense that those countries that have not contributed have also not developed. You understand? Those who have not contributed the carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere, the evidence is that they have not been developing using the dirty energy, the coal and the fossils in general. Is that when we have this drought, it's mostly in Africa and other developing countries, but Africa is the worst hit. And then when I said for 21 years, 1992 to this period, if the world only had to be discussing to agree for 21 years, they are only discussing how to agree to work to face the climate crisis. This is so late. In fact, the emergency is very much felt in Africa. Everywhere you have floods in West Africa, droughts in the Horn of Africa, even droughts here, parts of Cameroon are affected, and then there's no, our economy or our agriculture is mostly rain-fed agriculture. When we have this drought or long dry seasons, they affect everybody. They affect the farmers, especially the smallholder farmers. So if we have to spend 21 years not agreeing, or only agreeing to agree, then that is, the emergency is not there. That sense is not there.
196 countries sealed the Paris climate change deal, which was hailed by many across the world. And there was so much behind the groundwork which was done to make it a reality. You were one of those behind the doors. You were received by President Francois Hollande in Élysée. What did it take behind the door to come out with that framework which we had?
I think the French maintained a policy of listening to everybody, and it was a very delicate role. because we are standing the chance, the ill luck of Copenhagen, if the French didn't play that listening role and we have the confidence of all the stakeholders that they were giving fair hearing to every other stakeholder. If it had to be something behind the doors, just like eliminating others, it might have failed again.
What did President Hollande in particular tell you, representing the African civil society? You exposed to him the situation of the Lake Chad, which of course has shrunk from 25,000 kilometers in the 1960s to about 1,500 kilometers squared now. All of that involved. What did you tell him in particular, and how did he respond?
The thing I personally told the president, and that was not just the first time. I had talked with Ségolène Royal sometime in mid-2015, and then the climate ambassador from France, who showed that they wanted to listen to everybody. That's why sometimes they called some of us to Paris to consult and see where the negotiations are going. But the bottom line is that we had a French presidency that was listening to everybody and listening to civil society. Let me tell you, I told him, there is no agreement that is not based on equity and justice. It is not business as usual. Those who have not caused the problem are suffering from it. And they need support, not as a matter of, a feel-good. It's not aid that they are demanding. The developed countries have a responsibility to make sure that developing countries eradicate poverty and have a development pathway that will not compromise their food security and will not compromise the environment. Specifically, what I told the French president is that equity and justice is a very important to feature in this agreement.
Okay.
And
yes. And what did he respond to that?
As diplomats, they say they have heard. And I believe he heard, because if you look at we are received at the presidency on the 10th.
The eve of the agreement on the 11th of December.
Yes, exactly. And then when you look at the agreement, you see in the preamble, I don't know the part of the preamble, but you see where they mention Mother Earth, the
planet we have.
Planet,
that we have to
Mother Earth.
Mother Earth.
Something that was brought by Bolivia some years ago, 2-3 years ago, and it was looked upon as if it was so radical. But you have the concept of Mother Earth and then climate justice in one of the preambular articles.
You are talking about climate justice, and that is your alma mater. You said that you told French president that African countries and other developing countries across the world needed support in particular. There is this famous $100 billion yearly contribution from the industrialized world. The French president said that they were committed to providing 4 billion euros as French contribution. From your reading of the situation, is that going to be sustainable? For the moment, we have only $62 billion in the account.
That is one of the things that Africa, Group of 77 and China were pushing for. They were talking about new, additional, scaled up, predictable, and accessible qualification to finance. It's not just finance. The $100 billion was not determined in Paris. That was during the COP in Cancun.
Cancun, Mexico.
Yes, in Mexico. That's COP 16, where they determined that $100 billion. But from experience, we've seen that climate finance has been a little bit very vague, because you don't know what climate finance is. When developed countries are saying, oh, we are providing climate finance. And then when you come to developing countries, you don't know where the climate finance has gone. We've discovered that ODA, that's other development assistance, commitments were rebaptized and called climate finance. That's for that reason that African countries, Group of 77 and China at large, were saying they should be new and additional to ODA, scaled up from public sources, predictable and accessible. So if you want to ask me if there will be any difference on this new commitment, I think let's give it a chance. Let's give this agreement a chance to see whether the letter will be accompanied by the goodwill, the good intent to want to do it. But if it's failed promises, we've had 21 years of failed promises.
You just talk of giving it a chance. Paris is just the starting gun for the race towards a low carbon future, says WWF UK Chief Executive David Nussbaum. Yes. Are you convinced that this time in Paris we had it correct? Were you satisfied? My first guest of the year is Dr. Dr. Munang from the United Nations Environment Agency, and he told me that there was climate justice in Paris, France. Do you hold the same language like him?
This is interesting. I don't want to comment on the comment of others, but as a climate justice advocate, we avoided the wars in France. So we maintained the ship afloat in France. That's my perspective. And thanks to the meticulous and and mastery of diplomacy of the French, we maintained the ship, the climate ship afloat. If it sank in Paris, as it did in Copenhagen, there would not have been any rescue. So we now have a platform of discussion, and I just wish that it's my hope that everybody is committed to what they committed to do, that they will put what now into action. Because
you are involved in these climate change discussions over the years. People will tell you that Africa spends roughly $300 billion yearly if we don't adapt to climate change situations. And this is a continent where over 620 million individuals lack electricity. What kind of energy will be needed for development purposes? Because the Saudis will tell you that the fossil fuel industry will not disappear because their economy is based on that. When we have to invest today in the energy sector, because this is where the issue of climate is felt. Renewable?
From my experience, from my little experience, when you build a house from scratch with a good plan, it is easier than remodeling an old house. Sometimes remodeling an old house becomes much more costly. What am I trying to say? Yes, it is, we would have also loved to develop, and quickly so. We have the chance of taking the pathway of the future, which is clean way of development. It is very costly. Even the companies that are based on fossil energy, on fossils, are also shifting. You had groups like, you had the business community well represented in Paris, like Women Business of the US, the other groups.
BP, British Petroleum, for example, has moved from about 85% to renewable energy, nuclear energy investment,
yes, because
Shell,
they have no choice.
And many others.
Because they have no choice. There will come a time, if not only for strategic and military reasons, where the fossil fuels will be useless.
Let us trash the issue of what you will be discussing in Morocco. What next?
Morocco will be the first meeting after this, after this Paris agreement. And it is like, it's a meeting, it's taking place on the African continent, we in the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance announced that COP22 will be a COP of implementation. It will be a COP where people have to show that they meant business when they were in Paris, because they will people will be reporting on what measures they are taking, to
decarbonize
yes,
their
exactly.
countries.
Yeah, it will be so soon though to want to evaluate, because evaluation will come after every 5 years.
5 years.
Yes, but at least
which means that by 2020,
the indicators,
by 2020 we should be doing evaluation.
Yes. Well, it's 2025 because the agreement comes into force in 2020, when 55 countries representing about 55% of the global gas emissions would have ratified or signed it.
What kind of pressure will the civil society, which you are representing across the chessboards, will be putting on politicians? Because that is where the issue is. The Republicans in the US will tell you that this is a trash by the Obama administration, which of course comes to an end next year. Maybe Francois Hollande may not be there in the days to come next year equally. And you have a series of new administrations in Western countries. The British will be telling you that, okay, probably there will be a referendum to maybe stay or leave the European Union. When you have this new political climate, especially in Europe and North America, are you frightened of the voice of the civil society?
I'm not frightened. Let me tell you one.
Let me just give you a practical example.
Yeah.
Imagine a certain Donald Trump at the White House as president, who is, of course, a pew of what they call neocons in the American political system.
Yeah. You see, the thing is, the people power is increasing and increasing on a daily basis.
You are expecting another Arab Spring.
There will be a time.
Sure.
And the time has come when world decisions are not taken by politicians alone. It's taken by the people. And that is what helped in France to be, for us to reach this level. That was in 2010, we had the African Ministerial Conference in Mali, in Bamako. Then one of these seasoned negotiators, Jonathan Peshin from US, came, and then we confronted him, and I went to him because he's a very good guy, but a very stiff negotiator. He says, Augustine, I wish you are able to talk to the American people, to the American Congress. You understand? And then from that time till today, we have what we call the Northern Talk, people to people. And what we do, every year, the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance, led by some of us, go to America and to Europe. And in America, we speak to particular congressmen, senators, we speak in churches, we're working in collaboration with the National Advancement of the Colored People organization, the Martin Luther King organization. We are
National
partners.
Association for the Advancement of Colored People.
We are partners. We have very strong partnership.
But do you speak to people like Mark Rubio? Do you speak to people like Senator John McCain? Do you speak to people like Sarah Palin? Do you speak to people like Donald Trump? Do you speak to people like John Boehner, who just resigned as U.S. House Speaker?
I cannot name the number of senators or congressmen we've met, but we try to meet congressmen from across the board. And one thing that was interesting for me is some are against the climate science, not because they just want to be against it. It's because they've not been exposed to the real field situations. When you tell them what is happening in Africa, then they say, really? Is that what is happening? And then we turn and tell them, It's not only happening in Africa. Look, Katrina, Louisiana. You saw the black people. If you took the video of, and I have some of the videos, if you see it, the consequence.
Natural disaster of the Bush administration.
Exactly. You see how the black people were suffering more than every other person. So the problem is not with the American people. I say we give the analogy of the Titanic. You know the Titanic, the story of the Titanic, the lower people were on the lower deck and they started dying earlier. They felt the flood earlier. But at the end of the day, the whole thing sank. This, we are on a moving Titanic. Whether we are in the developing country or in the developed country, at the end of the day, everybody is sinking.
It is with the image of the Titanic that we end the program. Augustine Njamnshi, thanks very much from the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed for being guest on Globe Watch.
Bless you.